wording, and the permit 6451R1, the previous permit, the one that expired on May 11th, 2020, it too prohibited emission into the atmosphere of pollutants of any characteristic and duration which is or is likely to be injurious to public health or welfare, or which interferes with the reasonable enjoyment of life or property. I don't need to say more. Everybody has told you that there's activities in Buzzard Point that are very much injuring public welfare and public health. And the photos, right, show dust, visible dust, so clearly a permit itself, right, with that wording isn't going to be enough to protect people. So I am glad to see that the draft for permit 6451R2 has more steps. Thank you for equipping it to better fulfill the requirements. But more needs to be done. More needs to be done, and that's because not only are we hearing the health effects that people are talking about, but as pointed out by DC's Department of Health, right, this is a community that is already vulnerable and does not have the kind of economic and social resources that the surrounding communities do. And we have a study here. I brought you a paper. In our survey of 97 residents, 38% of respondents had asthma diagnoses, and another 25% reported having asthma symptoms. So that's a really high prevalence of asthma there. So I have some specific suggestions. I mean, I agree with everything that has been said in terms of things needing to be more stringent, and these are just some examples of where the current draft plan is not as stringent as it could be. First of all, you've defined an action level, and these 1 hour averages combined with analysis of upwind and downwind to figure out who's actually, emitting the high PM10 and high PM 2.5, that doesn't protect people immediately. Instead, what you're going to get is a record of what you all have been exposed to. And the data instead should be used to stop, right, to abate, right, then and there. And you have a model for this because you did this. DOEE had Audi Field Stadium construction requirements that activity needed to stop when there was a 15-minute rolling average of PM10 exceeding 100 micrograms per cubic meter. And as Ted mentioned, not only do we need immediate action to not only record but actually stop emissions before they happen, cumulative exposure needs to be taken into account because human health does not care whether emissions come from one concrete batching plant or another, right? Emissions are incrementally more harmful when PM is already high, and so to be truly protective, in addition to stipulations for PM10 and PM 2.5 concentration contribution from the facility, which are really, really high. But there also need to be concrete thresholds, right? Concrete thresholds that trigger action so that the facility is not contributing to emissions at times when PM 2.5, PM10 are already high enough to be endangering human health. The numbers that are in here are based on NACS. And you kind of wonder where the numbers come from because they're different than previous permit, for example, the one given to the Audi Field Stadium construction. But in any case, DOEE can, because we've seen it do this, right? It needs to implement stricter PM standards because we're talking about folks who are already suffering the effects of adverse poor air quality and health. And World Health Organization, right? 24-hour standards for PM10. It's 3 times lower than US EPA. That seems that it might be reasonable to go beyond just looking at the NACS. There were no provisions that I could find for sharing data with the public. Again, as Chris Williams pointed out, that is very, very important. There need not only to be reports of levels and access to that data, but explanations about causes and actions taken. If real-time data are possible, that would be even more powerful in citizens' hands. And now I'm gonna address something that has to do not only with the permit itself and the facility, but with DOEE, because there's a lot of places in here, right? There's a lot of places that talk about giving the facility 30 days to come up with a plan, 30 days to provide some measurements. And then what does DOEE do? It takes those and then it responds to them, and then they have so many days to respond to what DOE says. So my concern here, am I running out of time?
You're very close to the time.
Oh, okay, all right.
Got
Thank you so much, I
there.
appreciate your grace on that.
Yep.
Right, and so there's potential for delay on the part of DOEE. I mean, we're talking about a 4-year delay since when the permit was submitted to when we're having this, I mean, that the renewal, right, the renewal submission was made 3 days late, but 4 years ago. So, right, we don't want to have a case where there's this back and forth. So I'm wondering, like, is it possible, I don't write these permits, but is it possible to have concrete, right, actions already defined and in place so that there isn't this, you make a plan, we approve the plan, oh, that might take us a couple years, right? So that from the get-go, right, that they're putting things in right away. So if at all possible, DOEE, right, needs to have a timeline and process, and that needs to include public involvement. Lastly, I noticed this new statement that wasn't in the previous one, and it was about malfunctions. And I thought that was really interesting that the previous permit didn't have a statement about malfunctions, but this one has a statement saying that, you know, if there's unavoidable malfunction, right, that's defensible. So I'm concerned, because I'm concerned that maybe it's because this facility might have older equipment, and if that is indeed true, then DOE needs to define a reasonable time for limiting malfunctions and, you know, maybe a maximum time. So those are some concrete things, but all in all, right, should this even be operating? I think that is really a question to think about, because again, human health and public health, right, have been harmed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hsieh.